Good afternoon. Today I would like to discuss the Maui fires, setting the stage for a new world government. It was the deadliest fire since 1918. Actually, over 100 people died. The number of victims possibly was much greater than that, but we know at least Glenn Beck on his show August 30th said the Lahaina had run out of body bags at 480, so he thinks a lot more were dead than actually were stated. But all the billionaire homes were left perfectly fine. Oprah Winfrey owns 2,000 acres with 6 different parcels across the island. Not one was affected by the fires, even though they came close in several places. Other billionaire properties left just fine belonged to Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, Mark Benoit, others. The Lahaina is part of this, uh, was actually the capital of Hawaii at one time. And we look at the harbor before and after the fire, showing the absolute total devastation. Others that witnessed it said the desolation was beyond description. In fact, a 122-year-old Pioneer Inn, all renovated and lit up, now burned to the ground. This is where Mark Twain stayed, and Jack London, and Hawaii's last queen. It's a very strange anomalies. There were no alarms. Emergency management leaders missing. Uh, Herman Andea, the director of the Maui Emergency Management Agency, and Maui's fire chief, Bradford Ventura, both were off the island attending a special training in Oahu, preparing for disasters taught by FEMA. No warnings. There were no sirens. In fact, they had some of the best sirens, 80 state of the art sirens, modern sirens across Maui, but none of them were went off. Herman Andea was asked if he regretted not sounding the alarms, and he replied, "No, I do not. The people are used to sirens being used for tsunamis. Then they would flee to the mountains. He was afraid the people would hear the alarms and they would go mauka, in other words, crazy, and had gone into the mountains, run into the fire. The people were upset, saying Andea undermined their intelligence. He has soon resigned. And all the water was turned off for the entire island. Kaleo Manuel, the head of the water agency, said the following when asked why. He gave orders to turn off the water. He said, reverence to water is really important to our worldview and well being. But over time, we've come to used to thinking of water as just something we use, but not revere. That thing that just gives us life. It is a shift in value set. We as humans living on an island need to reconnect to that traditional value. Let water connect us and not divide us. That we can share it, but it requires conversations about equity. Amazing. While houses and properties are burning to the ground, people fleeing for their lives, many dying, Manuel wanted people to first have a conversation about equity, and then they could have water to fight the fires. Well, this is also part of the deep state, the shadow government that manipulates and shapes the policies of the visible government without regard to the best interests of the country, the U.S., the Constitution, the laws of Congress, or the public policies of the president who heads the executive branch. The deep state does exist within the shadows of power and is working to submerge the United States in an emerging new world order against the stated policy of America first. The leaks from the intelligence community intended to delegitimize and even topple the then duly elected President Trump are just part of the evidence exposing the existence and direction and power of the deep state. Evidence of the deep state is seen in the use of mass migration to upend Christian culture and the idea of nationhood, the creation of refugee crisis, environmental fear-mongering as a means of advancing world government, the building of regional economic political blocs as another means of achieving world government. China's leading role in advancing these plans, the economic consequences of our government's response to COVID-19, what's really behind the anti-riots of 2020, and the propagandizing and dumbing down both morally and academically of our children via the deep state's most powerful weapon, the government schools. Agenda 21 is a blueprint, an action plan to inventory and control all land, all water, all minerals, all plants, all animals, all means of construction, all production, all energy and all information on all human beings in the world. It's a total comprehensive plan, and data collection is a part of this plan. We've been in an inventory phase for a very long time. We're now moving into the control phase. We're now in a transition period between representative government and government by unelected boards and commissions, erasure of jurisdictional boundaries, loss of private properties, loss of sovereignty and our freedom. We're losing sovereignty not only to our dirt, but to our person. This is a concern not only for the United States citizens, but for free people all over the world. Prior to the current World Economic Forum theme, the Great Reset, it was called Agenda 21, meaning everything that they wanted to accomplish on the world scene concerning the environment, the economy, and equity, along with diversity and inclusion, was to be completed by the beginning of the 21st century. Well, they missed their mark. And the new target is 2030. As Klaus Schwab, the founder of World Economic Forum, said, in 2030, you'll own nothing and be happy about it. Well, he might be happy. One headline coming from the World Economic Forum: does capitalism need some Marxism to survive the fourth industrial revolution? This is another term for the Great Reset. The elite wanted to take the responsibility of self-responsibility off of our shoulders. They want to destroy small businesses because they don't fit in with their plans. That is why during COVID-19 pandemic, over 100,000 small businesses were shut down. It was the mom and pop stores that were permanently closed, while big businesses like Walmart, Costco, Target, and Fortune 500 companies remained open. Agenda 21 is a conspiracy by the United Nations to deprive individuals of property rights. Columnists in Atlantic have linked the opposition to Agenda 21 to be the property rights movement in the United States. They're taking over our educational system, children of the world, in this rescue mission. The planet groans every time it registers a new birth. Well, the theory of communism, according to Karl Marx, can be summed up in one sentence: abolish all private property. In a memo produced by Rich Higgins, while he was serving as the United States National Security Council director for the state strategic planning in the Trump administration, the deep state is referred to many times. It is a coalition of interests that are working to destroy, at that time, President Trump and America itself, bringing together the hard left, Islamist organizations, globalists, mega corporations, the bureaucracy, and others. The deep state was totally in support of Hillary Clinton, with over 95% of the money donated by federal employees going to Hillary Clinton's campaign. Conspiracies have existed throughout history. We see conspiracies throughout the Bible, such as Absalom's plot to overthrow King David, the plot to kill Apostle Paul in Acts 23, and Psalm 2:2, the kings of the earth conspiring against the Lord and his anointed. Ephesians 6:12, Paul warns the faithful of the spiritual struggle against principalities, against powers, against rulers of darkness in this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. The globalists created the refugee crisis. One of the most obvious impacts of mass Islamic immigration is the rapid de-Christianization of every facet in European culture. Even prior to the mass immigration, the secularization of Europe, which began centuries ago, all but wiped out biblical Christianity in Europe as a religious force. And this, combined with the ignorance of history, brought about the government miseducation, is no doubt, among many reasons, why the Europeans went along with their open border mass madness of their rulers, open borders and importing all these Muslims. The pace of change was far too slow for the globalists. And so by importing millions of Muslims from Africa and the Middle East, globalists found a new battering ram to accelerate the obliteration of the West's Christian foundations. In Belgium, Red Cross officers were asked to remove crosses from and crucifixes from everything to avoid offending Muslims. Similar demands are being made across the continent. In Switzerland, they asked the cross to be removed from the nation's flag, saying it no longer corresponds to today's multicultural Switzerland. From Norway to Italy, where children, even in the recent years, sang Christmas carols and engaged in other traditional celebrations, Christ is quickly being banned, generally under the guise of diversity, of not offending Muslims. Nativity scenes, crucifixes, and Christian Christmas parties are no more. In the United Kingdom today, more people attend mosques than in the Church of England. Today, European governments and the unelected regime in Brussels are deliberately importing Muslims by the millions at taxpayer expense while bombing Muslim nations and urging victims to come to Europe. They are doing this against the will of the people. Unless something radically changes, soon Europeans' Christian foundations will be totally destroyed. And as Europeans' Christian roots are obliterated, the fruit that came from those roots, prosperity, civilization, human rights, order, liberty, morality, science, and more, will cease to exist as well. And America is next. The use of direct energy weapons by the deep state, and we find this was probably what happened at Maui. We have laser, microwave, and particle beam direct energy weapons being used. Maui fires were used to procure the land for the smart city prototype. And Agenda 21 is simply the United Nations plan to take over everything from the air we breathe, our property, our use of energy, the food we eat, the water we drink, the air we breathe, the car we drive, where we live, and what we believe. It's an action plan to inventory and control all land, all water, all minerals, as I said, all plants, all animals, all construction, all means of production, all energy, and all information, and all human beings in the world. The particle beam weapons, Starfield 8, have a number of them: Reflection, Varun Inflector, the Star Shield, the Terror Inflector, Big Bang, Eternity's Gate, the Spacer, Novalite. Novalite's a particle beam pistol capable of doing 8 physical damage functions and 25 energy damage functions to the targets with each hit. A particle beam weapon is a weaponized version of this technology. It accelerates charged particles, in most cases electrons, positrons, protons, or ionized atoms, but very advanced versions can accelerate other particles such as mercury ions and mercury nuclei to near light speed and then directs them towards a target. The electron and protons of the beam are deposited on the target, which collide with the atoms of the target and break the atoms like snooker balls. The area of the target where the beam has been focused will heat up rapidly and the target will explode. This is what looks like it happened to many of the houses at Maui. A laser is a device that generates an intense focused beam of light. Lasers work by amplifying light through the process of stimulated emission, where the energy of an excited atom and molecule is released to form in the form of a photon. The photons are all at the same time and same wavelength and phase, resulting in a coherent beam of light. A particle beam, on the other hand, is a stream of charged particles that can be accelerated to high speeds using electric and magnetic fields. These particles in a beam can be ions, electrons, protons, or any other charged particle. So we have all these direct energy weapons, they call them DEWs. High energy lasers produce a very low beam of light, usually in the infrared to visible region, and are typically used on one target at a time. The beam can be pulsed or continuous, generating power output to at least 1 kilowatt. This output is 200,000 times that of a typical laser pointer. High-powered microwave weapons are also used. They produce microwaves, which have a longer wavelength than the high-energy lasers and millimeter wave weapons. These weapons can produce more than 100 megawatts of power, which is nearly 150,000 times more powerful than an average household microwave. So how do the direct energy weapons operate? They operate by using the electromotive EMF, electromagnetic force, and they can target an area, wipe it out with the speed of light by causing an explosion and fires just like a bomb going off. The military has used DEWs since 1973. Many described Lahaina as looking like a war zone when they first saw the remains of the fire. This is also what Governor Josh Green said in a press release, as reported by the New York Times on August 10th. It does appear that a bomb went off and left Lahaina looking like a war zone. DEWs can deny entrance. They can do a lot of things, but mainly they can be used as a weapon. And other strange circumstances happened at Maui. The schools were let out and children were sent home without parents' notification. Still over 1,000 children are missing. Where were some of the children kidnapped? There's a large sex trafficking area in Maui with underground tunnels. Similar kidnappings happen during other times of disasters. A police officer and his car blocked the long lines of cars that were trying to flee Lahaina until their cars were hit by fire. Many of the people died in their cars. Many of the boats on the bay, they're off half mile off the coast, were burned just like the cars. How does that happen with boats in water? What kind of dry grass brush fire melts metal and glass and destroys cement foundations? What kind of brush fire is so selective? It skipped over wealthy homes and just burned the poorer homes. This White House, and I show a picture here of a White House with a red roof, was newly remodeled at a value of $3.5 million, while all the other houses, the cheaper ones around it, were totally gone. Were the Maui fires really caused by direct energy weapons? There's an oval-shaped circle of fire with clear perimeters around Lahaina, something not possible if this were a natural fire. This is evidence of in plain sight of high-tech direct energy weapons. The reason for the effects of the Maui fires looked like a bomb went off is pretty much what happened. The reason the bodies were charred and tuned to fine dust is that this is what a bomb does to human flesh and everything it hits. There's no other explanation for it. These fires were caused by 5G direct energy weapons, resulting in electrical microwave fires. Only a DEW can reach temperatures so high as to melt metal and glass. Fires that vaporize houses and crumble cement foundations and melt glass and metal while leaving nearby trees and brush standing are deliberately set by DEWs, which can burn to such hot temperature to melt metal and glass 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Only a direct energy weapon can do that. The grass fire with high winds only gets up to 1,000 degrees. Trees were burning from the inside out. This is evidence of a microwave fire. How else can you explain trees burning from the inside out? A laser hits the ground and causes the water in the ground to be electrically charged, catch fire. The fire comes up through the roots of the tree. In Santa Rosa in 2017, 5,300 homes were destroyed, but all the plastic garbage cans were left untouched. Plastic does not burn in a microwave fire. The coffee park in Santa Rosa, also very selective fire. Fires burned on one side of the street, totally destroyed houses on one side of the street, and the other side, the houses are just fine. Coffee Park, the hardest hit part of Rosa, with over 2,200 homes destroyed. And the lawns are still green plastic garbage cans. The curb is left untouched. What kind of wild forest fire leaves trees standing and zaps every targeted home and car? And of course, we asked the question, was the Maui fire planned and for what reason? Various global meetings took place where the Governor Green spoke about Maui becoming a smart city and 15-minute city leader in the world. This was many years before. Various global meetings took place where Governor Green spoke about the Maui becoming the smart city and the 15-minute city. That cannot happen until private property is no longer private and is confiscated by the government. Amazingly, a book appeared on August 10th, 2 days after the fire, about the Maui fires, named Fire and Fury. Its second title is The Story of the 2023 Maui Fires and Its Implications for Climate Change, written by Dr. Miles Stone. The book had to be AI generated. No book could appear just 2 days after an event happened and be believable. It adds credence to the belief that someone knew about the fires and they were pre-planned. The governor is planning to acquire the land now. Governor Green he says in an interview with the press on August 18th that I am ready and looking at ways that the state can acquire the land so that we can put it back into the workforce housing. Governor C signed an emergency executive order called the Emergency Proclamation relating to housing on July 17th, just a few weeks before the fires. This executive order essentially gave the government the right to trample on 6 laws that were protecting private property rights when the natural disaster had been declared. January 3rd, 2023, Governor Green announced the first American smart cities or 15-minute cities, and we're working with Hitachi in Japan, who owns much of the electric grid in Maui and most of the rest of the world. The slogan is to build back better. In order for a smart city to a 15-minute city to be built, it must have land, it must have places available. So the conclusion is that when the government causes selective fires for globalist processes, this is called genocide, land grab, or socialism or communism. The buildings can be rebuilt over time. Even the banyan tree can survive, but we don't want this to become clear space where people from overseas come and just decide they're going to take it. The state will take and preserve it first. That was his excuse. Right now, there's building a large brown wall around Lahaina to cover up what they're doing. This wall of science seems to be um, turning to an actual physical law wall. The state will take and preserve it. When a state takes the land, what is it called? Socialism or communism? The first plank of the Communist Manifesto, as I said before, is to abolish all private property. This is playing into the script of the globalist UN 2030. They're smart cities, they're 15-minute cities. The use of direct energy weapons to start fires and select what areas should be destroyed. The use of HARP to create weather which would promote burning and eliminate possibility of rain, and the use of chemtrails to set up an atmosphere for burning. The space age is replacing the resource wars and redefines planet Earth as a battleship in accordance with a military doctrine of full spectrum dominance. There's a book called Chemtrails, HARP, and the Full Spectrum of Dominance. It examines how chemicals and ionospheric heaters like high frequency active auroral research project HARP in Alaska serves a full spectrum of dominance. The revolution in military affairs needs an atmospheric medium to assure wireless access to the bodies and brains of anyone on Earth. From heat-seeking missiles to form a mind control, how sinister are these technologies? Are they being prepared for a global village lockdown? The recent release of NSA records have reminded Americans the eyes of the sky are tracking us as supercomputers record phone calls, emails, internet posts, and even brain frequencies of millions. What is this spraying known? It's called genocide spraying operation. This is the chemtrails. There have been many independent studies done over the past 5 years, and it doesn't look good. It's been confirmed that all around our country, a cocktail of dangerous and extremely poisonous chemicals are being dispersed. This includes barium, cadmium, nickel, mold spores, yellow fungal mycotoxins, and the best radioactive thorium. This is not the total list. The one chemical that is being sprayed most is aluminum. It can cause all sorts of health problems. The chemical primarily attacks the central nervous system and can cause everything from disturbed sleep, nervousness, memory loss, headaches, and emotional instability. One thing to add to this, water samples on Mount Shasta, California, have aluminum levels that are high enough to kill rodents. The levels are off the chart, with the highest being 4,800 times the maximum contaminant level for drinking water. In a recent snow sample, the level was 100 times the level for aluminum in snow. What are the reasons why they chose Maui for a smart city? Well, first of all, it's a true 15-minute city since they're surrounded by water. Services and food supply are more easily controlled because it's isolation from surrounding cities. Only the rich can afford to live there, so the native population must move away or be homeless. And the governor, mayor, and chief of police were already liberal and would be complicit with a government takeover. Some things that indicate that the governor, the mayor, and the police and water authority were all in on the scheme is how the lack of water, the lack of warning signs, the blocking of residents trying to escape, the lack of food and other necessities were kept from the local residents proves a conspiracy. Even when the local other people were trying to bring food and supplies, they were blocked. They were saying, well, they don't belong to FEMA and they're not part of the Red Cross, so we won't allow it. Or they weren't done in commercial kitchens so that people could starve rather than receive this food that was trying to be given to them and was not allowed to be given. So why did media chose not to deviate from the excuse that the fire was an act of nature and not caused by greedy humans? It's because that was the only option they had, that it's caused by global warming. Yuval Noah Harari is openly gay, does not eat meat, Yuval Noah Harari is a lead advisor for Klaus Schwab, author of the COVID-19, The Great Reset, the founder of the World Economic Forum. Yuval Harari is the best-selling author and best celebrated by Barack Obama, Mark Zuckerberg, and Bill Gates. His book, Homo Deus, a brief history of tomorrow. He studied at Hebrew University in Jerusalem from 1993 to 1998, where he received his BA degree in specialized medieval history and military history. Completed his DPhil degree at Jesus College in Oxford in 2002, and the thing is, he is illustrating very closely what we see in Scripture. Because when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools and changed the glory of the uncorruptible God into an image made like to corruptible man, and to birds and four-footed beasts and creeping things. Wherefore God also gave them up to uncleanness through the lust of their flesh, their own hearts, to dishonor their own bodies between themselves, who changed the truth of God into a lie and worshipped and served the creature more than the Creator, who is blessed forever. For this cause God gave them up to vile affections, for even the women did change the natural use, that which is against nature, and likewise men, to leaving the natural use of women, burned with lustful toward one another. Men with men working that which is unseemly, and receiving in themselves the recompense of the error which was met. And even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them up to a reprobate mind to do those things which are not convenient, being filled with all unrighteousness and fornication, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, debate, deceit, malignity, whisperers, backbiters, haters of God, despiteful, proud, boasters, inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents, without understanding, covenant breakers, without natural affection, unmerciful, who knowing the judgment of God, that they which commit such things are worthy of death, do not only do the same, but have pleasure in them. This is what we see from the top down, from COVID-19, from people like Klaus Schwab, who says to your kids will eat the bugs. By 2030, there will be no more private cars. Highways will become parks. Klaus Schwab is peddling rebranded communism, which hates God. Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum, some people say they're not a threat, they're irrelevant. But Klaus Schwab climate plan is literally from the symptoms. Nobody will be safe if everyone is not vaccinated, he says. Well, that means the vaccines don't do any good, obviously. Klaus Schwab and the global founders say we do not need elections. Of course we don't need. They're just going to be in control. All these environmental schemes to advance world government. we see this. They call it climate change because they couldn't call it global warming because it went from global warming to global cooling. The idea is there is such thing as climate change. It gets warmer in the daytime. It gets cooler at night. It gets warmer in the summer, and it gets cooler during the winter. And there's about a 30-year cycle where it gets a little bit warmer and a little bit cooler, and it's been going on since the beginning of time. According to Brett Bart, 42 doomsday predictions have become renowned climate experts, and every single one of them has been wrong. They're 0 for 42. The Club of Rome, which was one of the first, the first global revolution, they wrote, in searching for a common enemy against whom we can unite, we came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortages, famine, and the like would fit the bill. All these dangers are caused by human intervention in natural processes, and it is only through changed attitudes and behavior that they can be overcome. The real enemy is humanity itself. Well, we look at the statistics, and satellite data shows no global warming for 21 years. CO2 emissions have the IPCC and alarmist models predicted accelerated warming, but no model predicted pause. We've concluded that temperatures have remained flat. Most recent UN IPCC report used 73 models, average shown in this map, that all predicted massive warming. All models were wrong. The excuse is the ocean ate my global warming. So, National Council of Churches even got involved in this global warming craze. They used Jesus as an advertiser for getting gas guzzling SUVs off the road and calling people of faith to drive fuel efficient vehicles. They raised the question, what would Jesus drive? Then they put cows with methane bags, because one way of the progressive end of the environment is to stop global warming is to put flatulent bags on the rump of cows to catch all the foul gases from going into our atmosphere. Cows, according to them, produce 40% of the methane that pollutes the atmosphere, while the termites, along with the cows, pollute the air more than all the gas-driven automobiles throughout the world combined. In an article in the New York Times, August 31st, way back in 1982, the headline was "Termite Gas Exceeds Smokestack Production Pollution." So no gas-driven vehicles. Big government wants to get us out of gas-driven vehicles by 2035 at the latest. In the meantime, there's a plan to put governors on cars so we'll be taxed for every mile we drive. I have 6 automakers agree to end gas car sales globally by 2040. Ford, GM, Mercedes-Benz, and others, along with 30 nations, signed a pledge to eliminate the sales of new gas and diesel-powered cars by 2035. According to General Motors, the Volt battery holds 16 kilowatts of electricity. It takes full 10 hours to charge from a drained battery. And a lot of people who've got electric cars are tired of waiting for their battery to be charged. Bjorn Longboard, an environmentalist, believed many of the myths that Al Gore and Lester Brown used in his criticism of civilization. However, being challenged about the legitimacy of his beliefs, he decided to investigate the accuracy of the environmentalist's claims for himself. He stated that the world's technical ingenuity exceeded most people's expectations. Food production continued to give more people more and cheaper food. The forecast would not be lost. The world would not run out of energy, raw materials of water, etc. Atmospheric pollution had been reduced in the cities in the developed world. There was good reason to believe they would also be achieved in developing countries. The world's oceans had not been polluted. The rivers had become cleaner and supported more life. And although a nutrient flux had increased in many coastal waters, this was more of a benefit than a problem. The total U.S. waste throughout the 21st century could be deposited in a single square landfill, 18 miles on a side. Acid rain did not kill off forests. Species were not dying out as many claimed, with half of them disappearing over the next 50 years. The figure is likely to be around 0.7%. The problem of ozone layer had been solved. It opens and closes over the South Pole every year. When, in fact, there's good reason to believe that energy consumption would migrate towards renewable energy sources. And finally, chemical worries over fear of pesticides are misplaced and counterproductive. The phasing out of pesticides wastes resources and causes more cancer. The cause of cancer is not chemicals, but lifestyle. A friend of mine, Michael Kaufman, was talking to me about this 20 years ago at a conference. And he said, contrary to what is heard over the media, the overwhelming evidence that the warming we're experiencing is natural within maybe a small amount attributed to man's activities, nor is there any scientific consensus. 31,000 scientists have signed a petition stating there is no convincing scientific evidence that human release of carbon dioxide is causing any significant global warming. In fact, Dr. Sherwood B. Eisel, a research physicist at the U.S. Department of Agriculture, suggested that far from hurting our planet, increases of CO2 will benefit the Earth. As atmospheric CO2 concentrations more than double, plant water use efficiencies more than double, and grasslands will flourish where deserts now lie barren. Shrubs will grow where only grasses grew before. The increase in CO2 will have a positive effect on the planet since it helps boost the productive capacity of green plants, leading to higher crop yields, more forests, less water usage by plants. Actually, global cooling is the problem as caused by an 1816 New England year without a summer, which caused large-scale agricultural losses and even famines. More interesting side is scientists output that the output of CO2 from termites is more than twice that from all fossil fuel consumption. There's a book called The Global Warming and Others Echo Myths, which I thought was great. Like communism, environmentalism wanted to claim objective science to justify its political programs because the post-Enlightenment world, science was the final arbiter of what was objectively true and what wasn't. Well, the eruption of Mount St. Helens in Washington state in 1980 dumped more than 910,000 metric tons of CO2 in the atmosphere, dwarfing the output of all industrial sources. Satellite data shows no global warming for 21 years, and alarmist models predicted accelerated warming, but no model predicted a pause. CO2 emissions have continued to rise, but temperatures have remained flat. Most recent UN reports used 73 models that all predicted massive warming. All were wrong. How many coal-fired plants are there in the world today? The EU has 468, and they're building 27 more for a total of 495. Turkey has 56, building 93 more for a total of 149. South Africa has 79, building 24 more for a total of 103. The Philippines have 19, building 60 more for a total of 79. South Korea has 58, building 26 more for a total of 84. Japan has 90, they're building 45 more for a total of 135. India has 589, building 446 more for a total of 1,035. And China has 2,363, building 1,171 more for a total of 3,534 coal-fired plants. The U.S. has 15, and they're building 0 more for a total of 15. No, the Maui fires destroyed the value of property, leaving residents with bare land, which investors and government could attempt to buy for pennies on the dollar. Biden's offer of mere $700 per landowner for losing their houses is unbelievable. Concerning advocacy journalism, Trump did not pose a threat to the freedom of the press, as did certain of his predecessors. Newsrooms and journalists were not imperiled by the former president. There were no known Sedition Act efforts attacking speech and free press freedom, no executive orders imprisoning reporters or shutting newspapers, no FCC actions against broadcast stations, no unprecedented criminal charges against media organizations or reporters, no omnipresent propaganda operations, etc. Nevertheless, the constant media refrain, whether from journalists or editorialists, trying to convince the American people of a demonstrably false narrative that President Trump had launched an unprecedented battering on the freedom of the press, thereby undermining the credibility of the institution of free press and free First Amendment with the public. Advocacy journalism is a genre of journalism which adopts a non-objective viewpoint, usually some social or political cause that it's advocating for. And democratic nations boast that the citizens agreed upon what is law, but is this the case? In reality, those who control what information the citizens receive are really in control. Edward Bernays, he was nephew of Sigmund Freud, explained in his book Propaganda how public relations used by businesses to get public to buy products has been adapted to get public to adopt political views. A larger manufacturer of women's shoes has a proper actress wear the shoes, the fashion spreads. The propaganda is also a tool increasing. This country is controlled by laws. Laws are controlled by politicians. Politicians are controlled by voters. Voters are controlled by public opinion. Public opinion is controlled by media, education, internet censorship, and therefore whoever controls the media, internet, and education controls the country. So whatever goes in, comes out. False experts are used. As noted in Manufacturing Consent, the political economy of the mass media by Edward Herman and Norman Chomsky, the propaganda model also incorporates experts to confirm the official slant on the news, taken for granted by media personnel and elite, but are often resisted by the general population. Thomas Sewell, a senior fellow of the Hoover Institute and Stanford University, stated, "Ours may become the first civilization destroyed not by the power of our enemies, but by the ignorance of our teachers and the dangerous nonsense that they're teaching our children. In an age of artificial intelligence, they're creating artificial stupidity. The definition of freedom of the press as freedom to say and write what one pleases, such a view belongs to the uneducated crudity and superficial naive thinking. Controlled media can favor or malign candidates. It can even spread false polling data prior to an election to prepare citizens to accept the results of voter fraud." On May 28, 2020, President Donald Trump signed an executive order to curb internet tech censorship. They've had unchecked power to censor, restrict, edit, shape, hide, alter virtually any form of communication between private citizens or large public audiences. There is no precedent in American history for so small a number of corporations to control so large a sphere of interaction. And they're using the market power to force particular viewpoints. As Solzhenitsyn stated in Harvard June 8, 1978, the press, media enjoys the widest freedom. If they have misled public opinion by inaccurate information or wrong conclusions, even if they have contributed to mistakes on a state level, we do not know of any case of open regret voiced by the same journalist or the same newspaper. No, a nation may be worse for such a mistake, but the journalist always gets away with it. Rumors and suppositions settle into the reader's memory, and the press can act the role of public opinion and miseducate its readers' memory. The press has become the greatest power within Western countries, exceeding that of legislature, the executive, and the judiciary. It has infiltrated into positions of public trust and responsibility, into journalism, the press, the radio, and the school. It seeks to through covert manipulation, the civil power and media of this public information and education to pervert the truth, impair respect for moral values, suppress human freedom and representative government, and in the end, destroy our faith in our religious teachings. The type of pressure which has caused many Christian nations abroad to fall. There can be no compromise with atheistic communism, no halfway in the preservation of freedom and religion. It must be all or nothing. George Washington warned further in contemplating the causes which may disturb our union, our parties, which acquire influence, to misrepresent the opinions and aims of others. You cannot shield yourself too much against the jealousies and heart burnings which spring from these misrepresentations to usurp for themselves the reins of government, destroying afterwards the very engines which lifted them to unjust dominion. This leads at length to more formal and permanent despotism. As Quigley said in his book, Cecil Rhodes, an enthusiastic supporter of John Ruskin, who came to Oxford, gave a lecture, and it was brought up. Cecil Rhodes was careful and accepted this. He's using the theory of Plato, and he works to bring all habitable portions of the world under dominion of a ruling elite. What Cecil Rhodes and Alfred Milner had in mind was a formation of a master-slave society based upon the principles in eugenics as derived from Plato's Republic. And the Federal Reserve Act of 1913 brought about the decimation of the U.S. Constitution and was the determining act of the international financiers in consolidating financial power in the United States. Carroll Quigley said the powers of financial capitalism had another far-reaching aim, nothing less than to create a world system of financial control in private hands, able to dominate the political system of each country and the economy of the world as a whole. The system was to be controlled in a feudalistic fashion, and the central banks of the world acting in concert by secret meetings and conferences. The apex of the system was to be the Bank of the International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland, a private bank owned and controlled by the world's central banks. And so we had this meeting. It's called the Creature from Jekyll Island, the secret meeting at Jekyll Island to establish a Federal Reserve. And the people, Morgan, Vanderbilt, Schiff, Rockefeller, Warburg, House, Wilson, Aldrich, all of these men owned a good portion of the world's wealth, established this idea that the Federal Reserve, and with the Federal Reserve, they could loan money to the government. So they would actually encourage wars because they would get interest on this money that they loaned to the government and printing it out of nothing. So the Federal Reserve Act was passed in 1913. It's interesting that Ian Fleming, who actually put together all of the James Bond series, was aware of what was happening with Milner, and he actually incorporated a lot of this into his James Bond books, which actually showed people trying to take over the world. In 1910, this group of individuals that made up over a quarter of the world's wealth met and gathered at a small island off the coast of Brunswick to agree the blueprint for the Federal Reserve. In The Creature from Jekyll Island, Edward Griffin forensically set out the dangers of the Federal Reserve, fiat money, and fractional reserve banking system. The Federal Reserve should be abolished because it's incapable of accomplishing its stated objectives, operates for private interests, and functions as a fiat money system. Through its mechanism of creating money from nothing, it generates for our most unfair tax, inflation, encourages war, ultimately acts as an instrument for totalitarianism. The Federal Reserve plays an important role in the broader agenda of global socialism. Throughout the last 400 years, powerful families have played both sides of war for their own financial gain. Central banks and the Federal Reserve is owned by a cartel of privately owned banks, decides interest rates and fate of the economy. During an economic crisis, the Fed bails out the potential cost of $23.7 trillion, more than $75,000 per person in the United States. They bail out friends, cronies, their own banks. Central banks and governments by 2014 own $30 trillion in stocks. They manipulate prices. And the idea was that the Wall Street itself is actually pushing communism. Stanford historian Anthony Sutton exposed Wall Street's role in establishing the communist state in Russia, financing communism and profiting from communism. They needed somebody, they needed a foe that was credible, and they needed to have someone that the United States would have to build up their defenses in order to defend themselves. And so the Soviet Union was chosen. Anthony Sutton wrote the book Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution, where they gave, I think it was $20 billion to Trotsky to support the communist system, sent him back over to Russia. In response to an enormous spending spree of Congress, just recently released trillions in new currency, which will result in rising prices, the devaluation of the dollar. It loans money, it prints out of nothing and charges interest. And of course, right now, what's happened in Zimbabwe, Venezuela, and the Weimar Republic, this is happening in America, and there's nothing that can stop it. Our dollar is worth about a penny of what it was worth in 1910. So I'd like to look at something called the Frankfurt School. The Frankfurt School was brought over here by John Dewey. Significant members were Herbert Marcuse, who came up with the idea of make love, not war. He says we must organize intellectuals and use them to make Western civilization stink. Only then, after we've corrupted all of its values and made it impossible, we can impose a dictatorship or the proletariat. And of course, so what we had was these people. Herbert Marcuse went after all the universities. They would get money from the Rockefeller Foundation, and they would hire people in executive positions who would hire professors who were Marxists in their belief, who would hire associate professors who were Marxist, and it would go from postdoctoral work right through kindergarten. It permeated all the schools in America. And so it doesn't matter where you go, and that's why they teach evolution everywhere. And my good friend Jerry Bergman wrote a book called Slaughter of the Dissidents, where he showed that in every he got fired, even though he has 3 earned doctorates, I think, up to what they said would be almost like 20 master's degrees with all of his education. But he got fired, an excellent teacher, because he wasn't teaching evolution. And they found out that other professors, even though they weren't Christians, didn't believe in evolution, were fired from their position because it wasn't following this cultural Marxism belief. And it's basically evolution is a way of explaining things without God. So we have to have something in place to explain the creation. And of course, Herbert Marcuse and others from the Frankfurt School, they started the long march through the institutions. They bought up the 25 leading newspapers, put their man in charge as the executive editor who would hire people under him who were also Marxist in their beliefs, and then they would go write using this journalistic school and advocate for a particular position, which didn't matter whether it was true or not. And even though it wasn't true, they got away with it. So they could lie, they could basically deceive the American people and persuade them against, they could turn the people against our own country. So there was a Cold War between 1947 and 1991 with nuclear attacks, which prevented by the mutually assured destruction, MAD, and proxy wars fought between the United States and the USSR and China. Countries experienced their own political parties infiltrated by communist parties being established, coup d'etat plots to remove leaders, and military conquest. During that time, 45 countries became communist satellites, often with brutal purges which killed millions. The countries included Afghanistan, Albania, Angola, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Belarus, Bosnia, Bulgaria, Cambodia, China, Congo, Cuba, Croatia, Czech Republic, East Germany, Egypt, Estonia, Ethiopia, Georgia, Herzegovina, Indonesia, Hungary, Kazakhstan, Laos, Latvia, Lebanon, Lithuania, Macedonia, Moldova, Mongolia, Montenegro, Mozambique, Nicaragua, North Korea, Poland, Romania, Russia, Serbia, Slovakia, Slovenia, Somalia, South Yemen, Syria, Tibet, Turkmenistan, Ukraine, Uzbek, Vietnam, Yemen, Yugoslavia. And the main takeover tactic was to find groups within the country with grievances, organize these groups to protest and to riot, escalate riots to violence and bloodshed, bribe, threaten, and co-opt media to control the narrative of blaming an existing leadership, and then in the midst of the national confusion, carry out a coup or rigged election, overthrowing the country's representative government and replacing it with a totalitarian dictatorship. And citizens are initially relieved that order is restored, but when the dust settles, they have a rude awakening and find their freedoms gone. The USSR's Committee for Satellite Security, in other words, KGB, organized a clandestine opposition groups to destabilize pro-Western countries. Now, we also have something called regionalism. And this is a way to get around that most nations don't want to give up their national sovereignty. So what they'll do is they'll take a region, and this is called ICLEI, International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives. This is what was done in cities all over the world. They would take 2 or 3, 4 cities, counties, areas, in fact, sometimes go over national boundaries as well, and they would make this a region. And this region would have cities which had different laws, so they would have their laws which would override the city's laws. Now, this was also true of free trade agreements, where the free trade agreements between two countries would actually involve making certain laws that they would agree to, which would override their national laws. And so free trade agreements were something similar to regionalism, which would be designed to create a new world order. So they were chopping in these countries into bits and pieces, and then eventually bring all the regions together, and they would have their new world order. And today, the EU has a single currency, a law enforcement agency, a proto-continental military, and much more. Brussels, where the monster is headquartered, has stolen more power than even the U.S. federal government has taken from the United States. in some areas, United States states. The African Union is another one of the more advanced regional unions, smashing national sovereignty and imposing unelected supranational rulers on diverse peoples. Already, the AU has a parliament, a military, a court of justice, and more. And we have the Union of South American States. In South America, globalists and communists have foisted on the peoples an emerging superstate known as UNISOL. Inspired by the European Union, the forces behind the sovereignty shredding scheme envision a United States of South America, complete with a South American military. The Eurasian Union. In Eurasia, Russian strongman Vladimir Putin is spearheading the creation of what is currently known as the Eurasian Economy Union, EEU. And in the worldwide deception, there is no populated region on Earth not being subsumed under regional government right now. This is called the International Council. In fact, in 2024, June 19th through 21st, in Sao Paulo, Brazil, there is going to be the ICLEI World Congress, International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives. It was launched in 1990, the International Council, and it was one of the non-governmental organizations, in other words, the United Nations, operating in association with the United Nations, self-described as an association for over 1,200 local government members who are committed to sustainable development. ICLEI seeks to swallow up nations' independence by having local governments adopt the overall Agenda 21 program in piecemeal fashion. Because independent nations are obviously too large to swallow in a single gulp, ICLEI was created to gain control over local governments one bite at a time. ICLEI's website openly admits that its local Agenda 21 model communities program will aid local governments in implementing Chapter 28 of Agenda 21. The Global Action Plan for Sustainable Government, and the former Clinton administration advisor Gary Lawrence later worried that there might be some who discover that ICLEI effort constitutes an attack on the power of the nation state, and at a seminar in England, he told a British audience, the segment of our society who fear a one world government and a UN invasion of the United States through which our individual freedoms might be stripped away would actively work to defeat any elected official who joined in our effort. So we'll call our processes something else, such as comprehensive planning, growth management, smart growth. And that's what we see happening in Maui. It's an illustration, it's a city that is being taken over by this smart growth concept. They're going to make it the entire island artificial intelligence controlled, and the U.S. has decided that the educational and policy programs are not enough. Transformation requires carefully coordinated, linked up system designed to leverage each element of the system. As a result, they've created STAR, which will be monitoring greenhouse gas emissions in every city, carbon offset trading, greenhouse gas emission goals. Legal statutes are designed and being lobbied for by ICLEI. And back when Obama was president, he promised to reduce greenhouse gases by below 80% of our 1990 level. And of course, this would put us back in 1934 with the midst of the Depression. However, when we look back at the per capita usage, it puts us back into the 1880s. But of course, your horse gives out too many gases, so we're back to bicycles. The piecemeal implementation of Agenda 21 through ICLEI is what is happening, and the sustainable plan is contained and is being advanced under an array of deceptively labeled initiatives such as cap and trade, global warming, population control, gun control, open borders, illegal immigration, higher taxes, higher gasoline prices, refusal to drill for oil and natural gas, educational restructuring, international IDs, health supplement control, food control, farming reform, control of private property, and so forth. In fact, this was all published in a book called Growing Smart, a legislative guidebook, the model statutes for planning and managing of change, which is a transformation of our traditional life to a life where we have no control of our future. We're like animals. And by 2002, this book was on every college, every university, every municipality, the League of Nations, the League of Cities, and the National Association of Counties. The President's Council for Sustainable Development came up with a second book entitled A Sustainable America, a New Consensus for Prosperity, Opportunity, and a Healthy Environment. The book tells you that you want a planned future. You do not want sprawl. Anything rural is called sprawl. This would mean practically the whole state of Maine. This is sold to you and our city officials as an economic driver. There's no longer names like Agenda 21 or Smart Growth. Instead, they disguise it with cute sounding names like One Bay Area. And this is a beginning of what we see. It's the beginning of the end, the one world government. And with that, I will conclude. Appreciate your listening. And this is what's coming down from every city in the country and every city in the world. They're wanting to control all of us, everything that we have and everything that we hold dear, especially our belief in God. Thank you.